Snow drifted across the empty streets of downtown Chicago, soft enough to make the city look innocent. It was nearly midnight on Christmas Eve. Most apartment windows glowed with warm lights, families gathered around decorated trees, children fought sleep while waiting for Santa Claus, and holiday music echoed faintly from distant balconies. Brooke Sullivan wasn't celebrating. She sat alone beside the window of her small apartment above her bookstore, wrapped in an oversized cream-colored sweater with a mug of hot chocolate cooling between her hands. At 31 years old, Brooke had learned to appreciate quiet holidays. The bookstore downstairs barely made enough money to survive. She had no siblings, no grandparents, no husband, and no children. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 8 years old, leaving behind more questions than memories. Yet every Christmas had always been different. Not because someone celebrated with her, because someone remembered her. For 23 consecutive Christmases, a gift had appeared outside her apartment door. Never late, never early, always sometime between midnight and sunrise. No note, no signature, no fingerprints, no witnesses. Just a perfectly wrapped present waiting patiently outside her door every Christmas morning. The first one had been a tiny stuffed polar bear. The second, a children's storybook her mother had once pointed to in a bookstore window. At 12, she received her first watercolor paint set. At 16, an antique fountain pen engraved with her initials. At 22, the first edition of her favorite novel. At 29, the exact espresso machine she had secretly admired online but never told anyone about. Whoever sent the gifts somehow knew her. Not the version of Brooke the world saw. The real Brooke. The woman who secretly bookmarked books she couldn't afford. The woman who still cried whenever she smelled cinnamon because it reminded her of baking cookies with her mother. The woman who pretended she wasn't lonely. Every gift felt less like generosity, and more like someone whispering, "I know you." She had spent years trying to discover the sender. Neighbors, security cameras, delivery companies, building management. Nothing. Every camera somehow failed. Every witness claimed to have seen no one. It had become the greatest mystery of her life. Tonight, she intended to solve it. Brooke glanced toward the old brass clock hanging above the fireplace. 11:08 p.m. She reached for the notebook resting on the coffee table. Inside were 23 handwritten pages, one page for every Christmas. She had documented every gift, every ribbon color, every wrapping paper design, every tiny detail. Patterns emerged. The wrapping paper never repeated. The handwriting never existed because there were never cards. The gifts somehow reflected events that had happened only weeks before Christmas. Last year's gift had been a rare gardening book she had quietly looked at inside another bookstore but never purchased. No one had been with her. Someone had still known. That thought had frightened her more than comforted her. Someone had been watching. The question was, who? A cold gust rattled the apartment windows. Snow thickened outside. Brooke quietly switched off every light except the Christmas tree. The apartment sank into warm golden shadows. She carried a blanket toward the hallway leading to the front door and sat silently on the wooden floor. If someone came tonight, she would hear them. Midnight arrived. Nothing. 12:12 NR. Silence. 12:00 AM. Still nothing. Her eyelids grew heavy. She forced herself awake with another cup of coffee. Outside, snow buried the sidewalks beneath a flawless white blanket. Then, at exactly 1:03 a.m., a distant engine. Not one. Several. Brooke frowned. The sound didn't belong in her quiet neighborhood. She carefully moved toward the window overlooking the street. Her heartbeat slowed, then stopped. 3 identical black SUVs rolled silently beneath the streetlights before parking directly across from her building. Their headlights switched off simultaneously. The street became unnaturally still. The doors opened. 6 men stepped out. Each wore a perfectly tailored black coat. Each moved with military precision. Each scanned the empty street before speaking into hidden earpieces. Brooke instinctively stepped back from the window. They weren't police. They weren't security guards. And they definitely weren't delivery drivers. One of the men opened the rear passenger door of the center SUV. A polished black leather shoe touched the snow. Then another. A tall man slowly emerged. He was broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal overcoat, black gloves, and a dark wool scarf. Snow settled across his neatly combed black hair without disturbing it. He didn't look around. He didn't appear nervous. The city seemed to move around him instead. Even from 3 stories above, Brooke could feel something impossible to explain. Authority. Not loud. Not theatrical. Absolute. The bodyguards instinctively stayed several steps behind him. Not because he ordered them to, because they already knew. He walked alone toward her building carrying a small crimson gift box wrapped with a gold ribbon. Nothing extravagant. Nothing oversized. Exactly like every Christmas before. Brooke's pulse thundered in her ears. It's him. For 23 years, she had imagined this moment. An elderly neighbor, a forgotten relative, a family friend, a retired teacher. She had imagined hundreds of faces. None looked like this man. He climbed the front steps without hesitation. His movements were calm, practiced, as though he had climbed these steps dozens of times before. Brooke quietly unlocked her apartment door. She left it barely open. Her breathing became painfully shallow. She heard footsteps outside. Steady, unhurried. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. The mysterious visitor had stopped directly outside her apartment. Brooke tightened her grip on the doorknob. She could hear nothing, not even breathing. Slowly, the wrapped gift was placed on the floor. A soft scrape against the welcome mat. She counted silently. 1, 2, 3. This was always the moment he left. Not tonight. Before he could take another step, Brooke pulled the door open. Cold winter air rushed into the hallway. The men froze. For the first time in 23 Christmases, their eyes met. Deep, steel gray eyes stared back at her. Not startled, not angry, only quietly sad. Snowflakes melted across the shoulders of his coat. The crimson gift box rested between them. Neither spoke. The bodyguards at the end of the hallway instinctively reached inside their jackets. The man raised one gloved hand without turning around. Every guard immediately stopped. His gaze never left Brooke. She swallowed. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Was it always you? The corners of his mouth lifted into the faintest, most bittersweet smile. When he finally answered, his voice was calm, deep, and carried the weight of someone who had lived with too many ghosts. Every Christmas, a silence settled between them, heavy, intimate, and impossible to escape. Brooke's heart pounded as 1,000 questions collided in her mind. Who are you? The man's expression darkened for the first time. He looked at her as though he had rehearsed this moment for years, yet still dreaded it. Then, from somewhere down the street, the roar of another engine shattered the silence. One of the bodyguards pressed a hand to his earpiece. His face drained of color. He looked toward the mysterious man and said only 4 urgent words. Boss, they're here. The stranger's eyes hardened instantly. The warmth disappeared. The predator returned. He looked back at Brooke one last time. Take the gift, he said quietly. And whatever happens next. His jaw tightened. Don't step outside. Before Brooke could ask another question, headlights exploded across the snowy street. More black vehicles turned the corner at terrifying speed. Someone had found him, and Christmas was about to become a battlefield. The peaceful silence of Christmas Eve vanished beneath the scream of tires cutting across the snow. Brooke instinctively stepped backward. The stranger didn't. His expression remained perfectly calm, as if violence had become as ordinary to him as breathing. The black gift box still rested between them. For a split second, neither of them moved. Then the first gunshot shattered the night. The hallway windows exploded inward. Glass rained across the wooden floor. Down! The stranger lunged forward without hesitation, wrapping one powerful arm around Brooke's shoulders and pulling her against the wall, just as another volley of bullets ripped through the entrance of the building. She felt the force of his body shielding hers. Not once did he use her as cover. He became hers. Outside, engines roared. Men shouted. Automatic gunfire echoed through the narrow street. The bodyguards responded instantly, drawing concealed pistols as 2 more SUVs skidded to a stop in front of the apartment building. Brooke's pulse thundered. She had never heard real gunfire before. The stranger looked over his shoulder. Marco. A bearded man in a navy overcoat appeared almost instantly. Take Miss Sullivan upstairs. Marco hesitated. And you? The stranger glanced toward the entrance where bullets continued striking the stone walls. I'll make sure they regret coming. Brooke grabbed his sleeve before he could leave. No. The word escaped before she realized she'd spoken. He looked down at her hand gripping his coat. Fear filled her eyes. You'll get killed. Something almost imperceptible softened in his expression. I've survived worse. You don't know that. I do. His answer carried no arrogance, only certainty. Another explosion shook the building. The lights flickered. Marco gently stepped between them. Miss Sullivan, we have to move. She refused to let go. The stranger slowly covered her hand with his gloved one. Even through the leather, his touch felt unexpectedly gentle. Please. One word. Quiet. Controlled, yet somehow impossible to refuse. Brooke finally released him. He picked up the small crimson gift box from the floor and pressed it into her hands. Merry Christmas. Before she could answer, he turned and disappeared into the storm of gunfire. Marco guided Brooke through a narrow service staircase leading to the upper floors. She could still hear bullets outside, still hear shouting, still hear tires spinning against the icy pavement. What is happening? She whispered. Marco didn't answer immediately. He waited until they reached the roof access hallway before speaking. The safest place tonight is away from every window. Brooke stared at him. Who is he? Marco stopped walking. For a moment, he looked almost sympathetic. You really don't know. She shook her head. Marco sighed quietly. Then perhaps Christmas should have remained a mystery. Before Brooke could ask another question, the rooftop door burst open. Several armed men rushed inside. Not attackers. More bodyguards. One spoke rapidly into his radio. The south alley is secure. The western approach is clear. No visual on Moretti's shooters. Brooke caught one unfamiliar name. Moretti. Marco noticed. His face became unreadable. You weren't supposed to hear that. Who are they? Our enemies. Our? Marco looked at her carefully. You'll understand soon enough. 10 minutes later, the gunfire stopped. The silence felt even louder. Snow continued falling across Chicago as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Marco's phone vibrated. He answered immediately. Yes, boss. A long pause. I understand. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. It's over. Is he alive? Marco almost smiled. He usually is. An hour later, Brooke sat in her apartment, wrapped in a blanket, while police officers photographed shattered windows and collected shell casings from the hallway. None of them explained what had happened. Most seemed strangely reluctant to ask questions. 2 detectives quietly exchanged nervous glances whenever they looked toward the street. One finally approached Brooke. Miss Sullivan, did you recognize the individual involved? She hesitated. She realized she didn't even know his name. Before she could answer, Marco appeared beside the detective. My client has already agreed to cooperate if necessary. The detective's expression changed immediately. He nodded once. No further questions. Then he simply walked away. Brooke frowned. They just left. Marco offered a polite smile. Some people know when they're looking at something beyond their authority. Who are you people? I work for someone who owes your family more than you'll ever understand. My family? Marco didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the unopened crimson gift resting on her coffee table. He insisted you receive that personally. Brooke looked at the perfectly wrapped package. What's inside? I've never asked. You've never been curious? Marco's smile carried genuine warmth. Our boss values loyalty above curiosity. The words lingered in the room long after he left. Nearly 3 hours passed before Brooke finally gathered the courage to open the gift. She carefully untied the gold ribbon. Inside lay a handcrafted wooden music box carved with delicate snowflakes. When she lifted the lid, a soft melody filled the apartment. It wasn't a Christmas song. It was the lullaby her mother used to sing every night before bed. Brooke froze, her breathing caught. Only 3 people had ever known that melody: her mother, her father, and herself. She turned the music box over. Hidden beneath the velvet lining was a tiny folded piece of paper, the first handwritten message she had ever received. It contained only one sentence: "I promised them you would never spend Christmas alone." Brooke read it again, and again, her vision blurred with tears. "Who are you?" she whispered into the empty apartment. Outside, the snowfall continued. Miles away, atop the highest floor of DeLuca Tower, the man in the black overcoat stood before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His white dress shirt was stained with blood where a bullet had grazed his shoulder. Marco entered quietly. "The building is secure." The man never turned around. Was she frightened? Yes. A long silence followed. And disappointed. He closed his eyes. "I expected that." Marco stepped closer. She opened the gift. A faint smile touched the man's face. "Good. You can't hide forever." "I know. When will you tell her?" The man stared at the snow-covered skyline. "When she can hear my name without hating me." Marco looked at his oldest friend with quiet concern. "She deserves the truth. So did her parents." His voice became almost a whisper. "And I failed them." For the first time in years, the most feared mafia boss in Chicago looked less like a king, and more like a man carrying a promise that had become far heavier than any empire. Far below, hidden in the darkness across the street from Brooke's bookstore, another pair of eyes watched her apartment through a camera lens. The observer slowly zoomed in on the warm light glowing from her living room. Then he smiled. "So," he murmured into his phone. The ghost finally introduced himself. A cold voice answered from the other end. "Bring me the girl." The line went dead. Christmas had ended. The hunt had just begun. The morning after Christmas arrived beneath a gray Chicago sky. Snow still covered the sidewalks outside Brooke's bookstore, but the city had already moved on. Parents hurried children toward school, coffee shops filled with exhausted commuters, delivery trucks crawled through slushy intersections. To everyone else, it was just another winter morning. To Brooke, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. She unlocked the front door of Sullivan Books just after 8. The familiar scent of old paper and fresh coffee usually calmed her. Not today. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the music box sitting on the counter upstairs. "I promised them you would never spend Christmas alone." She had read the note at least 50 times before sunrise. Someone had made a promise to her parents. Someone powerful enough to send armed bodyguards. Someone willing to stand between her and a hail of bullets without hesitation. But why? The bell above the bookstore door chimed. An elderly customer smiled warmly. "Merry Christmas, Brooke." She forced a smile. "Merry Christmas." For the next 2 hours, she helped customers find novels, wrapped late Christmas gifts, and recommended children's books. She tried to focus. She couldn't. Every black SUV that drove past the front window made her heart race. Every stranger wearing a dark overcoat caught her attention. By noon, the snowfall had slowed. Brooke carried a box of donated books into the storage room in the back of the shop. She had barely set it down when she heard voices near the front entrance. Male voices, calm, professional, not customers. She quietly peeked around the corner. 3 men in tailored black suits stood just inside the bookstore. They weren't browsing. They were watching. One subtly checked the street through the front window. Another touched the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. The third noticed Brooke almost immediately. He smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Miss Sullivan." Her stomach tightened. "You know my name." "Yes." "Who are you?" "We're here for your safety." "I didn't ask for protection." "No." He nodded respectfully. But someone else did. Brooke crossed her arms. "I'm not leaving with you." The man actually looked relieved. "We weren't instructed to ask." She frowned. Then, why are you here? To make sure everyone else leaves safely. The sentence chilled her. Before she could ask another question, the bookstore bell rang again. This time, every bodyguard straightened at once. The room fell silent. A tall man stepped inside carrying nothing but a folded black umbrella. His charcoal overcoat was dusted with melting snow. Steel gray eyes calmly surveyed the bookstore, then settled on Brooke. She recognized him immediately. The mysterious man from Christmas Eve. He removed his leather gloves with unhurried precision. I'm sorry for coming without calling. Brooke stared at him. Customers continued browsing, completely unaware that the most dangerous man in the room had just entered. You shouldn't be here. I know. You brought gunfire to my apartment. I brought protection. You brought both. He accepted the accusation without argument. Yes. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Brooke walked toward him. You still haven't told me your name. The man looked into her eyes for several seconds. My name is Luca. Just Luca? For now. She sighed. You always answer questions without answering them. I've had to. And now, I'm trying not to lie to you again. Those words caught her off guard. Again, not anymore. Progress. Small, but real. She folded her arms. What do you want? He glanced around the bookstore. I'd like to buy a book. Brooke blinked. A book? I've been told this is the best bookstore in Chicago. Despite herself, she almost smiled. You have bodyguards outside. They insisted. You own 3 armored SUVs. They insisted on those too. I don't think anyone tells you what to do. His expression remained perfectly serious. Marco Tris. She laughed. Just once. Softly. The sound surprised both of them. For the first time, the tension eased. Luca wandered between the bookshelves with genuine curiosity. He stopped in front of a display of classic American literature. You arranged these. Yes. You grouped them by emotional themes instead of authors. Brooke looked surprised. You noticed. I notice everything. He reached for a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. My mother read this to me. Brooke looked at him. You remember your mother? Every day. The answer carried enough quiet grief to end the conversation. She realized something unsettling. This wasn't a man pretending to be human. He was simply someone who had forgotten how to live like one. Before either of them spoke again, the bookstore window shattered. Glass exploded across the floor. A rifle round buried itself in a bookshelf inches from Brooke's head. Luca, he was already moving. In one impossibly fast motion, he wrapped an arm around Brooke's waist and pulled her behind a solid oak display. Another shot ripped through the front window. Customers screamed. Bodyguards flooded the bookstore. Sniper, Luca, never looked away from Brooke. Are you hurt? She shook her head. You? I'm fine. Blood slowly spread across the sleeve of his overcoat. She stared. You're bleeding. He looked down as though noticing it for the first time. It's nothing. It isn't nothing. Outside, tires screeched. The sniper disappeared before security could reach the rooftop. Within seconds, the bookstore became a fortress. Customers were evacuated through the rear exit. Police sirens echoed in the distance. Luca remained beside Brooke the entire time. Only when everyone else was safe did she notice something else. His bodyguards weren't protecting him. They were protecting her. Every formation, every movement, every weapon created a shield around Brooke, not around their boss. She looked at him. They're guarding me. Yes. Why? His jaw tightened. Because if anything happens to you... He stopped himself. What? For the first time since she'd met him, Luca hesitated, then quietly said, I would never forgive myself. Before Brooke could answer, Marco hurried inside holding a tablet. His face was pale. Boss. Luca immediately recognized the expression. What happened? Marco turned the screen toward him. A photograph filled the display. It showed Brooke leaving the bookstore that morning. A red cross had been drawn over her face. Across the bottom of the image, 5 words were written in black ink. Your promise dies with her. The bookstore suddenly felt colder. Marco lowered his voice. It came from Damian Moretti. Brooke looked between them. Who is Damian Moretti? Neither man answered. Luca slowly closed his eyes. For years, he had believed he could protect Brooke from the darkness surrounding his world. Now, the darkness had learned her name. He opened his eyes again. Calm, cold, certain. Then he spoke the words that would change Brooke's life forever. You can't go home tonight. She stared at him. What? The moment they threatened you. His voice became the quiet command of the man every criminal in Chicago feared. You became my responsibility. Outside, another black SUV rolled silently to the curb. This time, Brooke realized it hadn't come to watch. It had come to take her into a world from which almost no one ever returned. And somewhere across the city, Damian Moretti watched live surveillance footage of the bookstore attack. He smiled as he closed the laptop. Run, Luca. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. The faster you protect her, the sooner you'll show me what you've been hiding for 23 years. Brooke had always believed there were two kinds of silence. The peaceful kind she found between the shelves of her bookstore, and the lonely kind that filled an apartment after everyone you loved was gone. She was about to discover a third. The silence that followed a death threat. The black SUV rolled through downtown Chicago without attracting attention. Its windows were dark enough to hide every face inside, while two identical vehicles traveled ahead and another followed behind. Brooke sat in the rear seat beside Luca. Neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected across the glass as snow continued falling outside. Finally, she broke the silence. Are you going to tell me what's happening? Luca kept his eyes on the passing skyline. I am. When? When I can prove it. She frowned. That isn't an answer. No, it never is with you. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth before disappearing again. I've spent too many years speaking carefully. Because you're a criminal? His jaw tightened. Because every word I say has consequences. Brooke looked away. She wanted to hate him. He had lied about his name, about his life, about everything. Yet when bullets entered her bookstore, he hadn't hidden. He had shielded her with his own body. Those memories refused to disappear. The convoy turned away from the busy streets and entered the historic Gold Coast neighborhood. Towering iron gates slowly opened. Beyond them stood an enormous stone mansion, surrounded by snow-covered gardens, century-old oak trees, and discreetly positioned security cameras. Brooke stared through the window. This is your house? Luca answered quietly. No. The SUV stopped beneath a covered entrance. Marco opened Brooke's door. Welcome. She stepped outside, staring at the breathtaking mansion. This isn't yours? Marco exchanged a glance with Luca. Luca finally spoke. It belongs to you. Brooke laughed. It wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. What? I purchased it 9 years ago. Her smile disappeared. I've never been here. I know. Then why would you buy a house for someone you've never met? I had met you. She looked confused. No, you hadn't. Luca's expression grew distant. I watched your bookstore open. I watched you unlock the doors on your first morning. I watched you cry when your first customer bought nothing. I watched you celebrate when your first profitable month finally arrived. Brooke slowly stepped backward. You watched me? He didn't deny it. You've been watching me for years? To make sure no one else was. Her heartbeat quickened. That's not protection. It was the only way I knew how. Her voice trembled. You had people following me? Only to keep you alive. You had me under surveillance. Yes. She stared at him in disbelief. For the first time, fear outweighed curiosity. You don't even realize how terrifying that sounds. Luca lowered his eyes. I do. You should have left me alone. I couldn't. Why? He remained silent. She shook her head. I'm leaving. Marco quietly stepped aside. No one here will stop you. Brooke walked toward the front gate. She made it exactly 12 steps. Then she noticed the black sedan parked across the street. Its engine wasn't running, but someone inside was photographing the mansion. Marco followed her gaze. So they've already found us. His voice remained calm. too calm. Within seconds, the sedan sped away. Marco spoke into his earpiece. Vehicle moving east. No pursuit. Record the plate? Luca looked at Brooke. If you leave now, they'll follow me. He nodded. They've stopped hunting me. They're hunting you. The realization struck harder than she expected. She hadn't entered Luca's world. His world had already entered hers. That evening, Brooke wandered through the mansion alone. Despite its size, it didn't feel like a palace. It felt lived in. Books filled nearly every room. Fresh flowers rested on the dining table. A fire burned inside the library fireplace. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. Nothing resembled the cold luxury she had imagined. She stopped in front of a framed photograph resting on the grand piano. It showed a much younger Luca, perhaps 15, standing beside a smiling man in a paramedic uniform. Her breath caught. The man's face looked familiar, very familiar. She leaned closer. It couldn't be. The front door opened behind her. Luca entered quietly, removing his overcoat. He noticed the photograph immediately. You found it. Brooke slowly turned. My father. Luca nodded. Yes. She picked up the frame with trembling hands. How do you have this? He gave it to me. When? The last day I ever saw him alive. The room fell silent. Brooke looked from the photograph back to Luca. My father knew you. He saved me. Her heart skipped. What? I was 12. My family had just been murdered. I was bleeding in an alley. No one stopped. No one except your father. Brooke listened without moving. He put me inside his ambulance. He told everyone I was another accident victim. He lied to armed men searching every vehicle leaving the neighborhood. He saved my life. Luca's voice remained steady, but his eyes carried memories he had never escaped. He knew exactly who I was. Brooke whispered, a mafia child. Yes, he still saved you. He said, Luca paused, that no child deserved to die because of the sins of adults. Tears filled Brooke's eyes. My dad really said that. Luca smiled sadly. He reminded me of that sentence every year. She looked down at the photograph again. What happened afterward? He was killed 6 months later. Her breathing stopped. The accident. Luca slowly shook his head. It wasn't an accident. Brooke stared at him. My parents. They were murdered. The room seemed to tilt. No, I'm sorry. No. She backed away. My whole life. I thought. Luca stepped forward instinctively. She raised a shaking hand. Don't. He stopped immediately. She struggled to breathe. My parents died because they saved you? Luca closed his eyes. Yes, and for 23 years, you've carried that guilt. I've carried that debt. Silence swallowed the room. The crackling fireplace became the only sound. Finally, Brooke asked the question that had haunted her since Christmas Eve. So every gift. He looked directly into her eyes. Was my way of keeping the promise I made beside your father's hospital bed. What promise? Luca's voice barely rose above a whisper. I promised him that as long as I was alive, his daughter would never believe she had been forgotten. Brooke's tears finally escaped, not because she understood everything, but because, for the first time since she was 8 years old, someone had finally told her the truth about her parents. Across the city, inside the penthouse of the Moretti organization, Damian Moretti studied another surveillance photograph. This one showed Brooke standing only inches away from Luca. He smiled. So that's it. He slid the photograph into a leather folder. It was never about the girl. It was always about the promise. He looked toward the snow-covered skyline. Break the promise, and you break the man. Outside, church bells echoed across Chicago as Christmas Day came to an end. Inside the mansion, Brooke stood before the fireplace, clutching the old photograph of her father. She had finally learned why a stranger had remembered every Christmas of her life. But she had also uncovered a far darker truth. The promise that had protected her for 23 years had become the very reason someone now wanted her dead. Brooke didn't sleep. The fire in the library had burned low hours ago, but she remained in the same leather chair, her father's photograph resting in her lap. Outside, snow continued falling over the DeLuca estate. Inside, every word Luca had spoken replayed in her mind. Your parents didn't die in an accident. Your father saved me. I promised he would never be forgotten. For 23 years, she had believed she was the lonely survivor of a tragic crash. Now she understood something far more painful. Her parents had chosen to save a frightened 12-year-old boy, knowing exactly who he was. And they had paid for that choice with their lives. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Luca stood in the doorway. He had changed into a black sweater instead of one of his perfectly tailored suits. Without the armor of expensive clothing, he looked less like the ruler of Chicago's underworld, and more like the exhausted man she had briefly seen beneath it. "May I come in?" She nodded. He didn't sit beside her. Instead, he remained several feet away, giving her the space she silently demanded. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For waiting this long to tell you. You were a child. I became a man, and I still waited." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Brooke looked up. "Did my parents ever regret saving you?" The question struck him harder than any bullet ever had. "No." "How can you be so sure?" "Because your father visited me once." She frowned. "Visited you?" 6 months after he rescued me. Luca stared into the dying fire. "He brought me a birthday cake." Brooke blinked. "My father baked?" "A terrible one." Despite herself, she laughed. Luca smiled faintly. "He burned half of it." "That sounds like him." He apologized the entire afternoon. The smile disappeared from Luca's face. "He told me something I'll never forget." Brooke waited. He said. Luca swallowed quietly. "Don't become the monster people expect you to become." The room fell silent again. Brooke slowly looked at him. "Did you?" Luca couldn't answer. Because he already knew the truth. He had become far worse. At sunrise, Marco entered the library carrying a sealed envelope. "Boss." Luca immediately recognized the look on his face. "What happened?" Marco handed him the envelope. No return address. Only one sentence written across the front. "Open it with her." Luca's expression darkened. Where did this come from? It was delivered by bicycle. No cameras. No fingerprints. Brooke's stomach tightened. Luca carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Brooke as a little girl, 8 years old, standing beside her parents at a Christmas tree. Across the bottom, someone had written in red ink, "Look closer." Brooke leaned forward. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then, her breath caught. Standing across the street in the background, barely visible beneath a street lamp, was a teenage boy, watching them. "Luca." Brooke looked up in disbelief. "You were there." He slowly nodded. "I watched every Christmas after they died." "You were outside our house?" "Every year, without ever knocking. I wasn't allowed to." She frowned. "Allowed by who?" Luca didn't answer. Instead, he reached inside the envelope again. There was another photograph. Older. Brooke graduating high school. Again, far in the background, a black sedan. Someone leaning against it, watching. Another. Her college graduation. The same man. A bookstore opening ceremony. Again, always distant, always hidden, always him. Tears filled Brooke's eyes. "You really never left." "No, you watched my entire life. I promised your father." She looked at him for a long time, then quietly asked, "Why didn't you simply tell me?" His voice became almost inaudible. "Because every person I love dies." Hours later, Brooke wandered into the mansion's private chapel. It was small, simple, nothing like the extravagant mansion surrounding it. 2 candles burned before a wooden cross. She noticed fresh flowers. Someone came here often. Luca entered a few moments later. "My mother liked this room." Brooke turned toward him. "You pray?" "I remember." He walked to the front pew. There, hidden beneath the candlelight, rested 2 marble plaques. Brooke slowly approached. The first carried the names of Luca's parents. The second made her knees weaken. Daniel Sullivan, Emily Sullivan, her parents. She looked at Luca. "You built this?" 22 years ago. You visit them? Every Christmas. Before Brooke could answer, the chapel doors burst open. Marco rarely showed emotion. This time, his face was white. Boss. Luca stood immediately. What is it? Marco handed him a tablet. Live security footage. The front gate, a black limousine had stopped outside. One man stepped out wearing an expensive charcoal coat. No bodyguards. No visible weapons. Only confidence. Marco spoke quietly. It's Damian Moretti. Brooke whispered. The man who threatened me? Marco nodded. He says he came alone. Luca's eyes narrowed. He never comes alone. Another guard's voice crackled through the radio. Boss, we found something. What? A package. Where? At the front gate. Luca's expression hardened. Don't touch it. Too late. A deafening explosion tore through the winter morning. The mansion shook violently. Windows shattered throughout the east wing. Smoke poured above the front entrance. The chapel lights flickered. Brooke instinctively stumbled backward. Luca caught her before she fell. His arms wrapped around her only long enough to steady her. Then he released her immediately. Another radio transmission came through. This one carried panic. Boss, they're inside. Marco froze. Impossible. The explosion wasn't the attack. The guard's terrified voice echoed through the chapel. It was a distraction. Luca slowly turned toward Brooke. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, fear for her. He reached inside his coat and removed a small, antique brass key attached to a faded leather tag. He pressed it into Brooke's hand. If we become separated. She looked down at the engraved numbers. 214. Go to the place this key opens. Brooke stared at him. What is it? Luca's answer was barely a whisper. The real promise your father died protecting. Before she could ask another question, every light inside the mansion went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Then, somewhere deep inside the estate, a woman screamed.